really matters? That might be the most important question you can ask. So let's talk about it. Welcome to What Really Matters podcast, Everyday Spirituality with Karen Wyatt. Thanks for joining me here again today. This is part 2 of my talk about trauma that I started last week. And if you didn't listen last week, you may want to go back and take in that episode first, because I'm kind of continuing on with some of the thoughts and themes from last week. And so it'll make a little bit more sense to you this week if you've heard that one first. So I do want to carry on with the discussion of trauma. There's so much more that's important to be said. And now that I've kind of opened myself and started looking at information about trauma, it seems to be coming to me from everywhere. Like even on my iTunes on my laptop, I was going through and cleaning out old files, and there was an interview with a psychologist about trauma that from about 3 years ago, but I'd never listened to it. It just happened to get downloaded into iTunes, and there it was. So I listened to that today. Other books and posts and conversations about trauma are coming to me. And so I feel like this is such an important conversation for all of us to look at. And I want to share with you some of the insights and resources that I've been able to gather. Last week, I mentioned that I still needed to talk about ancestral trauma and how we can inherit trauma from previous generations. I'll give a brief explanation of that right now and probably go into that some other time in a future episode, because I want to go back to just our own childhood trauma that we experience in our own current lifetime. But ancestral trauma seems to be inherited genetically from our ancestors, and it occurs in the RNA and DNA strands that wrap around the genes that we inherited at birth. And these strands determine whether or not the gene will be activated, deactivated, repressed, or emphasized. So it's within these strands of DNA that help control the genes. We inherit whatever we inherit, but it's the strands wrapping around the genes that can determine whether or not those genes are activated. So sometimes those genes are carrying tendencies toward a particular illness or a particular character trait, and that trait could be exaggerated and emphasized. It could be repressed or deactivated by the strands that surround the gene. So while we inherit our genes from our ancestors, we also inherit the epigenetics, the strands of DNA that surround the genes. So when one of our ancestors has endured trauma of a particular type, if that trauma has not been healed, then the damage to the DNA strands gets passed along to the next generation. And so you can look back at enormous, huge traumas, the Holocaust, slavery, the genocide of indigenous tribes in our country and countries all over the world. Those are enormous, huge traumas that entire populations experienced together. But the people who experienced those traumas initially have had damaged epigenetics, which then got passed on to each subsequent generation. So we could be carrying some of the wounds and the damage from our ancestors within our bodies. It is possible to heal that wounding as well as to heal the wounding that we encounter in our own lives. And so that's the most important thing to know. We can heal everything, all of the trauma that we're carrying, whether it's from our own lives right now, our present current lives, or something that we carried with us genetically from an ancestor. And so waking up and becoming aware of the types of trauma that we might carry is essential for us as we move on through the world. And one of the biggest deterrents to growing in consciousness is holding trauma within us that doesn't get healed. And you've heard me talk about this before, about looking within our shadow and healing our wounds. And that is where trauma resides. These wounds that we carry for ourselves and perhaps for our ancestors. I want to go a little deeper into trauma, and based on the psychologist that I was just listening to in a podcast, Dr. Jamie Marich, who says, I really like the way she talks about it, that trauma is simply an unhealed wound, and that oftentimes in our society we hear about trauma as PTSD, and we imagine that the only people who really have experienced trauma have been in a war or have been through some horrific experience, but that we can be carrying trauma even from experiences at school when we were children, or the family experiences that we've had of sometime when we didn't have our emotional needs met when we were younger, simply because our parents aren't perfect. No parent is ever perfect. And so we can be carrying these wounds that have never been healed because we haven't had a chance to look at them. And she believes, as does Dr. Bessel van der Kolk and Gabor Mate, that trauma is really at the foundation of much of the mental illness that we see in our society, that many of the diagnoses that people carry, like bipolar disorder and borderline personality disorder, have been influenced by trauma earlier in life. And yet, contemporary psychology and psychiatry right now are not focusing on trauma from the past, and oftentimes not even addressing it. And because we have kind of over medicalized and over medicated treatment for people, most likely people who come in complaining of symptoms, which may very well be the result of trauma they experienced early in life, those people are most likely to be given a medication, an anti-anxiety medication, a sleeping pill, something for depression, rather than having sessions that would help them look at the trauma. And even when people are being offered treatment for trauma, it's often just cognitive therapy where they sit and talk about it and think about the trauma. And what Bessel van der Kolk pointed out, and also Dr. Jamie Marich, is that we need to be doing body-based therapies as well. So talking about our wounds or our trauma, that's called top-down therapy. And top-down therapy can help us with our thoughts sometimes and can help us modify our thoughts, but doesn't help us with the experience of trauma that is stored in the body. And so top-down therapy is putting a Band-Aid over the wound, and we need the Band-Aid. We do need to bandage wounds in order for them to heal. So it's important, but it's not the whole thing, because we're missing the underlying wound of the trauma that has happened, that's being carried in the physical body and in our emotions. And so top-down therapy is using cognitive therapy to talk about our trauma or our wounds. Bottom-up therapy is doing body-based treatments to help us explore our emotions within our body. And we really need both types of healing. It's just the bottom-up type of healing is largely missing and not utilized in our current psychology and psychiatry practices. So this is something we have to learn about for ourselves and do for ourselves, because we may not be able to find therapists out there who can help us with it. So again, last week we talked about how the ACE study and how adverse childhood experiences can cause trauma, which we carry with us in our body and can affect our physical, emotional, and mental health. And I mentioned some things we can do to work on that trauma, but I wanted to go a little bit deeper in how we can can work on ourselves to heal our trauma. And the first step is just awareness of the trauma itself, to bring it into our conscious awareness, whether it's ancestral trauma that we've inherited through generations. We need to understand our own family's history and our ancestors. What have they been through? What have they experienced? Did they immigrate to the U.S. because they lived in a country where there was war or famine or poverty? And how much did they suffer in that process of moving away from home and leaving their own family behind to try and come and start a new life? You can look at all of the various types of trauma our ancestors experienced. And yes, of course, we know not in my family, but in some people's families, there have been horrendous, horrific, community-wide traumas like the Holocaust, slavery, genocide of indigenous people, the internment during World War II of people of Japanese origin, all of those atrocities committed against large groups of people. And yet, even if our ancestors did not experience any of those things, they probably endured suffering and trauma and challenges of their own that may have caused wounds that ended up getting passed along from generation to generation. So this awareness is what is essential. So for one thing, do a family timeline, a family history, and look back within your own lineage as far as you can go to kind of understand what your ancestors experienced in their lives. But also do your own timeline of your life and your immediate family's experiences to help you see where challenges and stressors and difficulties came up that caused suffering for people in your family and that could have resulted in wounding. That's one of the ways of coming to awareness of our traumas, bringing them up sometimes from places where they may have been repressed, or we may keep them in the back of our minds because we really don't want to think about it. But in order to heal, we do have to shine a light on those old wounds that we're carrying in the past and allow them to come to the surface. So that's the first step, is awareness. The second step is that we have to take responsibility in our own lives for the trauma that we carry, and not because we brought it on ourselves. No, we didn't at all. The trauma was given to us, but it is now part of us, and we have to be responsible for who we are, for our bodies, our minds, our emotions, because these experiences were part of what life brought to us. And it's important that we decide, I'm going to take it into my own hands and empower myself to heal what has occurred in my life and what has been given to me. I didn't cause it. I didn't bring it on. I'm not to blame for any of it. That's not the point of taking responsibility, but I now have this as part of my life. I have these wounds, and I, as a self-actualized person, would like to work on healing the wounds. So that is what I mean by taking responsibility, deciding that I'm going to own this, and I'm going to take the steps necessary to make this better. And the amazing and beautiful thing, particularly with ancestral trauma, is when we heal something that is generational for ourselves in this lifetime, we are actually healing it in reverse. We are actually healing it through the past for our ancestors. And we're making sure that we're not going to pass it on to future generations. And so this is beautiful work. By choosing to work on whatever trauma we carry, whether it's from our own lifetime or from our ancestors, we can make big changes for our families, for the world, for the future by doing the work right now. So again, become aware and be willing to take responsibility. Make up your mind that you can do something to heal, and you would like to, and you're going to. So the next step is to begin to learn some self-regulation skills, because that's how you keep yourself from becoming dominated by your emotions whenever something difficult or challenging arises. So you have to learn for yourself, discover whatever it is that helps you calm down quickly in the moment as soon as your emotions get triggered and you feel yourself kind of flying out of control. What tools can you utilize that help you get things back in control again? And ultimately, the best tool is to learn how to pause for just 1 or 2 seconds before your emotions begin to fly out of control, because when you can instill a little pause, you can often prevent yourself from reacting emotionally at all to the trigger that's there. And it buys you just enough time to begin to engage rationally and to use some of your practices and tools to help you calm down or stay calm in whatever state you happen to be in. So deep breathing, I've mentioned it before. I talked about it last week. I talk about it all the time. Deep breathing is one of our very best tools for calming down the body. If you exhale for a longer period of time than you inhale, say you inhale for 6 counts and exhale for 9 counts, you activate your own parasympathetic nervous system, which is the part of your nervous system responsible for the relaxation effect. It counteracts the fight or flight response that the sympathetic nervous system causes, which is what gets triggered when your emotions are elevated. So the parasympathetic nervous system slows down your heart rate and helps you get back into a calmer state. So by breathing in for a count of 6 and out for a count of 9, you activate that parasympathetic nervous system immediately. This brings such a rapid change. You won't even believe it until you try it. All you have to do is take a couple of breaths and you will begin to feel yourself feeling calmer. You will feel everything ramping down a little bit and feel the escalation of your emotions will stop. So it's finding just enough space, just enough pause to remember, take a deep breath. And the moment you take one deep breath, you'll be able to take a second one and then a third one. And by that time, your heart rate will be down, you will feel calmer, and you'll be able to engage your higher cortex again to help decide how you want to behave and choose what do I want to say now, and choose the better thing to say and the better way to react, and keep your emotions managed and handled. So deep breathing is just so very powerful. Some other suggestions that I've read that can be helpful, especially if you're feeling like you've really lost it, you feel out of control with your emotions, you can't get back to a rational state, is to wrap yourself in a comfy blanket that makes you feel secure and safe. Maybe turn on some soothing music and listen to it through headphones so that it's really washing over you and surrounding you. Maybe you have a safe spot in your house, like a chair you like to be in, a certain room that you really like next to a window, some place, whatever you've found feels very safe to you. Sit with your blanket, listen to some music, and be in the safe spot until you can calm down again. So this is a good tool. If you couldn't get to the deep breathing quickly enough and your emotions really have ramped up and you find yourself just completely losing it, find a way to pull back in and get yourself centered again and back in control. So it's really important that you figure out what tools will work for you. And you may have to experiment a little bit to find out what makes a difference for you, what helps you get in control. Always try deep breathing, because that should work for everyone. And the great thing is you can use it anywhere at any time. You don't have to have your comfy blanket with you or be near your safe space. You're breathing in every moment. So you can just manage your breath and it can change everything for you. It's so very powerful. Also, this may not be available to everyone, but rely on your relationships and hopefully Somewhere in your life, you have someone with whom you have a safe connection, someone that you trust can hear you and listen to you and be with you without judgment, and that helps you feel safe. Now, sometimes those of us who've been traumatized by relationships in the past don't have that safe person that we can rely on. For some of us, it doesn't exist, because if we didn't feel safe when we were children, we never learned how to create safe relationships with other humans. And so we may not have any of those relationships. We may have recreated unsafe, traumatizing relationships in our adult life. So we may look around us and think, wow, I only have toxic people in my life who don't help me feel connected or seen and heard and safe. If you don't have that amongst your friends and family and the people around you, you may have to search for it. You may need a therapist that helps you feel safe. You may need to be part of a support group, a very positive healing support group where you feel safe and you can be yourself and talk about what you need to talk about. But maybe you can find that kind of safety with a pet, depending on whether or not you're a pet type of person. But I've seen many people be healed by their dogs and some by their cats as well. If you have a cat that connects with you and forms a relationship with you, to be able to hold your pet, stroke the pet, have the pet just look at you with their pure, unconditional love, that can bring you a sense of safety as well, a sense of being seen and heard. So you have to figure out what's available to you in your life and what works for you to help you find that safety. Another technique that can be very healing is writing. And again, I talk about this a lot, right? Keeping a journal and writing. But it's specifically important to keep a journal about your trauma, about your emotions, about the things that you learn when you go back and do your own timeline and when you do your ancestral history. To write about the types of trauma that you become aware of through the research you're doing, write the facts down, and then also write about your emotions. So what happened to you? How did you feel when it happened? And how do you feel now as you look at that experience? What happened to your family in the past? And how do you feel now when you hear about it and read about something that one of your ancestors may have gone through? This type of writing is really powerful in terms of increasing your awareness, but it also kind of grounds you and it can pull you back into your body in a way. You can also write about not just the emotions, but also how do I feel in my body right now as I'm reviewing this history and looking at this information. And so we know that journal writing, when it's focused like this, and particularly looking at trauma and looking at emotions, shows improvement in physical and mental health for people who do it regularly. So it's a very good habit to establish and can be very helpful to you. Again, I'll mention, I talked about this last week, but yoga has a very positive effect and can be very healing for trauma, because it helps you get into your body. You become much more aware of your body. You're experiencing the body, feeling what your body is feeling in the midst of yoga. You're also breathing with the movement that you do. You're also stretching the muscles in your musculoskeletal system, which is very helpful for releasing any trauma that may have been stored within the physical body. And yoga is also a type of meditation, and that helps you calm down the emotions and calm down your thoughts as well. So yoga, probably guided yoga, you can find videos online that can help you do some yoga stretches to get into the state of relaxation on the one hand, but also just more mindfulness and calmness. And one thing that Dr. Jamie Marich mentioned is that mindfulness and yoga teach us to be with what is, not necessarily to enjoy what is or to make what is better, but teach us how to be with life just as it is, to accept our lives the way they are. And she said, you don't have to like it, and you may not like it. You may not like what's happening, but mindfulness and yoga help you handle whatever life is bringing to you, whether you like it or not. And that sometimes people have the idea that meditation and yoga are supposed to make us feel happy and full of pleasure. And that isn't really the purpose. The purpose is to just help us be with whatever we have right now, and to not be searching constantly to try to make things better or different in our lives, to help us just sit and be with life as it is right now. She also mentioned that consistency in your practice is always better for the brain than inconsistency. So the more consistent you can be about trying to practice these things we've talked about, deep breathing, journal writing, yoga, mindfulness, the more consistent you are, the bigger impact it will have on the brain, whether or not you do these things for any significant amount of time. So as long as you make an effort every day, even for 5 minutes, to pay attention to your trauma body and to work toward healing, you're taking steps and making it positive. It doesn't have to be that, I spend an hour every day working on this, and then any day that you don't have an hour available, you skip it. It's far better to just say, I don't have an hour, but I'll spend 5 minutes today just doing this work. So if you can do a little bit every day, it's far more helpful than doing a lot a few days a week. That's what I'm trying to get across. So focus on, what can I do today? What do I have time for in my schedule? If it's only a little bit, just do that, because the consistency is what helps your brain rewire and create new synapses. It helps those DNA and RNA strands heal that are wrapped around our genes. It helps us in every way to just do something every day and have a positive focus every day. And so she mentions turning daily tasks into mindfulness. And she said, brushing your teeth can be a mindfulness meditation if what you do is focus entirely on brushing your teeth, feeling the sensation, smelling the scent of the toothpaste, tasting what it tastes like, the sound of the brush against your teeth, and feeling what your gums and tongue feel inside your mouth as you brush your teeth. That alone is a powerful mindfulness experience that you can do for a few minutes as you brush your teeth every day. Washing the dishes, folding laundry, making your bed. Any experience that you do often or task that you do often on most days is something you can turn into a mindfulness practice. So you can build these little moments of mindfulness into your day throughout the day with some of the tasks that you have. You can be mindful about going for a walk or a run, mindful about brushing your pet or stroking your pet. So you can find ways of creating mindfulness in your day that can help you get back into this calmer, more regulated state. The more you do that, the more you're training your body to adhere to that state and to figure out how to get there quickly. And the more you're down regulating your emotions so that they don't fly off so quickly and go from 0 to 60 so quickly. So these are just simple things that you can do on a day-to-day basis to help with trauma. And, I've always advocated a lot of these practices, but I feel like it makes so much more sense to me now. I see it so much more clearly why they're helpful, because they help us with trauma. And really, this kind of trauma work, we're going to have to focus on ourselves, as I mentioned, because right now we don't have a mental health system that's very good at dealing with trauma. So we may have to seek this out and find these healing practices for ourselves. And I hope you will, because what I'm convinced of is that we've all experienced trauma of one sort or another throughout our lives. None of us have had a perfect life, no matter what we've done. We've all had various types of trauma in life. And so don't discount your own trauma, but look at it with self-compassion. And I hope that you will want to heal your trauma just as I'm beginning to work on for myself. And we can go on this journey together. I'll let you know what else I learn and keep you posted. And I'll share a resource to Dr. Jamie's website in the show notes for this episode. So until next week, blessings to you. And may you feel safe and nurtured, and may you find the light and the grace and the self-compassion you need to work on healing your trauma. Bye-bye.